It's deplorable what he said. That's what I called it from the floor of the Senate 7 months ago. It will be deplorable 7 months from now if he says it again, and I will continue to speak out.
John McCain received a fake and phony dossier. Do you hear about the dossier? It was paid for by crooked Hillary Clinton, right? And John McCain got it. He got it. And what did he do? Didn't call me. He turned it over to the FBI, hoping to put me in jeopardy. I gave him the kind of funeral that he wanted, which as president, I had to approve. I don't care about this. I didn't get thank you. That's okay. Not my kind of guy.
President Trump today, we were going to start with U.S. manufacturing jobs in the Midwest, and we will get to that. But the president, in prepared remarks in a speech today, brought up and doubled down on comments he made over the weekend about the late Senator John McCain, 7 months after his passing. Prompting a response, as you heard there, and more of one, from Republican Senator Johnny Isakson from Georgia, who is a Trump policy supporter, also a friend of the late Senator John McCain. Now, having just returned from Hanoi, Vietnam, I spent some time in the Hanoi Hilton, and where John McCain spent 5 years as a prisoner of war. I went into those cells. I saw the places where he was held. Senator McCain will stipulate in this show right now, spent his life serving the U.S. and was an American hero, period. The end. We'll start there with this panel. Let's bring in our panel. Donna Brazile, former chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee. Washington Post columnist Mark Thiessen, and Susan Ferricchio, chief congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Okay, Susan, the president, it's gotten under his skin, and he's going back to it. He explained it a little bit more in the prepared remarks today. What about this?
Well, it's a big backstory there. He and McCain have not liked each other for a long time. McCain was an early critic of Trump when he was running for president, and Trump always would swing back at McCain, and the whole thing escalated. And, of course, there's the Steele dossier that Trump believes is behind the Mueller report that he thinks is hobbling his presidency. Now, McCain did go retrieve through David Kramer, his aide, the dossier, brought it back to America, gave it to James Comey, and David Kramer, his aide, shopped it around in the press. And that's how it got leaked out to the press. It's not verified. It's salacious. The president is very angry at McCain over this. The reason he started tweeting about this over the weekend, which is where all this started, and then the press asked him about it today during the pool spray, it came up over the weekend because of a deposition that was unveiled where we learned more details about how McCain was involved in the dossier, and that clearly got under Trump's skin, and he's not over it yet.
Clearly. But they built that into that speech, Donna. Yeah. Somebody's advising that, right? I mean, what is the thought process there?
I don't know. I mean, since 2015, the president has just been on this tirade against John McCain. When I was a little girl growing up in Louisiana, I don't know about you, Brett, but my parents said, you don't talk ill of the dead because the Bible says the living will die at some point. John McCain leaves a legacy of service. He leaves a legacy of sacrifice. More importantly, Donald Trump used this occasion at a military construction site. It's a union site, but he goes there and criticized the one guy in the United States Senate who fought for these type of tanks. So it's an odd thing to do. And as I said last night on Twitter, because I get to Twitter myself, I said to Cindy McCain and Meghan and the family, I said, you know what, ignore this. You're better than this. We're better than this. John McCain should be honored for his service, but the criticism, that's beneath the office of the president.
Meghan McCain addressed that today on The View.
I think if I had told my dad, 7 months after you're dead, you're going to be dominating the news and all over Twitter, he would think it was hilarious that our president was so jealous of him that he was dominating the news cycle in death as well.
And our colleague Britt Hume tweeted out, speaking of Twitter, why the President of the United States gets involved in petty disputes with someone most Americans have never heard of is beyond me. This is talking about Conway, Kellyanne Conway's husband, George. The same goes for his continuing feud with the late John McCain. Why bother? Mark.
So I get why Donald Trump doesn't like John McCain, and he has some legitimate grievances against John McCain, but he isn't hurting John McCain. John McCain is dead. He's hurting himself. I mean, he presumably went to Ohio today because he had a message to deliver about the manufacturing boom in this country that he's unleashed.
Which is a good message.
And it's a great story. You said at the outset of this segment, we were going to talk about that, but now we're talking, and we are. But he changed the subject, and he did it by showing a total lack of decency. And so what he's doing is, one, he's stepping on his own story, and two, there are millions of people in this country who are benefiting from the Trump economy, who have jobs and opportunity and better lives because of this, and they like Trump's policies, but they don't like him because of things like this. So the reason he's in the low 40s in his approval instead of above 50 is because persuadable voters look at this and they say, I don't want to support a guy who goes after a dead war hero.
Minus this, or minus some of these tweets, minus some of this counterpunching, would his approval be above 50?
Well, I think you make a really great point. It's the rhetoric that turns off the people who aren't either on the edge, on the cusp. They like what Trump does for policy-wise, but they hate him personally. And that makes them look at other candidates and think, well, I'll just vote for a Democrat, or I won't show up and vote. And that is his problem, really. You know, they don't understand why he doesn't like McCain, because the backstory is complicated. He tried to explain it a little bit today.
Well there. I mean, at the
it's hard to explain, and it goes back years. And McCain started it, and you know, he is a hero. Obviously, everybody loved him.
Well, I stipulated that at the beginning. But
yeah,
I mean,
he began it all, and so the two of them escalated it, and that's what in the backstory though is so complicated. The public doesn't get it. They just see him attacking a war hero, and like, oh, here he goes again. And it's
all right.
Not
So
good.
to Twitter, just before we started the show, great news at Ford. They're investing $1 billion in Flat Rock, Michigan, for an auto production on top of $1 billion investment last month in a facility outside of Chicago. Companies are pouring back into the United States. They want to be where the action is. U.S. manufacturing jobs during the Trump administration, Donna, are up significantly. Manufacturing jobs are up, and there is an optimism that he talked about that, again, largely got squelched by the John McCain comments, newsworthy-wise. But this is a story to tell for the Trump administration.
Well, look, I still believe he's building on the success of Barack Obama. Okay.
All right.
All right.
I mean, those numbers start 117.
But remember where we started back in 2009 after the Great Recession of 2008. He's building. But this president is not only just stepping on his message. He has to worry about his tax policies. What's driving some of these jobs overseas? What's creating the conditions in places like Lordstown where GM is thinking about closing its plant? Look, the union leader has been reaching out to the president, not the president of the union leader, the local leader has been saying, Mr. President, help us, help us. He campaigned on a promise to save American jobs. They now need him to save American jobs in Lordstown, Ohio.
There is a positive economic feeling, though, if you look at the numbers and you hear some of these states, and frankly, that hope was why he won some of these states, like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Mark, last word on this.
He's delivering for the forgotten Americans who put him in office. Look, manufacturing jobs have been rising for 18 straight months. 490,000 manufacturing jobs created under Donald Trump since he came to office. Obama said those jobs were never coming back. They're growing at the fastest pace in 24 years, and the unemployment rate for people without a high school education reached the lowest point in history, and their salaries are going up by 6%, which is outpacing the rest of the economy. That is a great story. I wish that he would talk about that and not step on his story so more Americans would know about it.
Well, you got to see it here. We just had to cover it all.
Republicans who largely ignore this sort of thing, with the exception of folks like Senator Isaacson, do they do so at their own peril? How do they look in the process? Daily Mail White House correspondent Francesca Chambers is with us, Democratic strategist John Summers, and Republican strategist Matt Brainard. Welcome to all of you. Francesca, largely silence out of Republicans when they hear this sort of stuff. Maybe saying, we're used to this, we move on from this. What's the deal?
Well, it's not just that, Neil. The fact of the matter is Donald Trump is the president of the United States, and Lindsey Graham has said that he wants to be able to remain in a position where he can advise the president. If he's on the president's bad side, the president wouldn't have him over to the White House as frequently.
But
so
is it worth that much that you would go ahead and surrender a decade-long friendship to stay in good relations with a guy in the White House bashing your dearest friend?
Well, again, Donald Trump is the one who's sitting in the White House, and John McCain is no longer around to defend himself. He has Meghan McCain defending him, as you pointed out earlier. But as far as foreign policy goes and being able to shape that, Donald Trump is the one who's sitting in the chair. He's the commander-in-chief. And so Lindsey Graham has said repeatedly that he feels that the ability to be able to advise the president on foreign policy, which so many times he had said that he disagreed with him on some of those issues, to be able to steer him on what Graham sees as the right track, has outweighed that consideration.
Matt, I don't know. I mean, I know you're a former Trump campaign director. It just seems weird.
No, I have to push back against this narrative that somehow this is bashing or a feud. These are really concrete public policy critiques of positions that were taken and actions that were taken regarding the Mueller investigation. This isn't something down, underhanded or dirty or crude. These are public votes he took, and that record is open for criticism. And I'll tell you something, maybe we can reconsider criticizing a politician's public record when the left lays off and stops vilifying Ronald Reagan, because that never ended.
John McCain did not hide the fact that he passed along that dossier early on, not knowing its origins, not knowing or caring whether it was Donald Trump or anyone else, just saying as a patriot that it was a big enough concern of his to pass it along, and somehow after the fact he's vilified for that. I could see what you're saying about votes on this matter or that matter.
It's not vilification, it's an honest criticism of that and his vote for the ACA, which was a massive betrayal of his public position on the matter.
But where did you ever hear that John McCain going into that night and that famous vote to turn it down was going to vote for it? No one I talked to who followed that very closely said that was the case.
He campaigned against it as a presidential candidate, as a Senate candidate, over and over. He raised a lot of money on the promise of fighting to repeal Obamacare, and we had the chance.
That was not the means to do it. So the president seemed to say that John McCain had already told him that he was going to vote for it. No one I talked to who was involved in that at the time said that was the case.
Well, who cares? What's that got to do with criticizing his position on the issue? He voted against repealing ACA.
That's fair. The president might have lied about it. Does that bother you that the president might have lied about what a dead man did?
Lied about the fact that he repeatedly said he opposed Obamacare? That
No.
You're
obfuscating the clear facts here. He said that John McCain had told him that he was going to vote for that measure, and hours later ultimately voted against it. Do you have proof that was the case? Because no one I talked to said it was.
Do you have proof that he didn't say it? Do you have proof that he didn't? I don't have it either way, but the point of anger here is the betrayal on an issue that he campaigned so hard against and then ended up voting to preserve Obamacare. That's a fair public critique. And turning this into some dirty skullduggery.
I'm just wondering about the discourse now. Because I don't think you have to be right or left to find that maybe you can be justified in making these remarks or thinking them. But I just think as President of the United States, they demean you. That's my opinion only maybe. I just think they demean you.
Yeah, I don't think you get a pass on criticism of your public record just because you're no longer with us.
All right, John,
again, we've never seen when
I understand your allegiance to the
pass?
president, Matt, and that's wonderful. But John, I'm wondering about the discourse and the debate this sets going forward. Do you worry about that?
Yeah, and I agree with you. I want to go back to the FBI report real quickly because this can't be left unchecked. What the president is mad about is he's mad at John McCain doing exactly what he should have done, which is turn that over to the FBI. Contrast that to what the president did and actually tried to use that information, created an open line of communication with the Russians who very clearly meddled in our elections. And that part can't go unchecked. In terms of what it's doing with our discourse, this falls way below the level of the office. Whether we're talking about attacking John McCain, and again, sure, I guess you're free to criticize, but to what end? What is he at all hoping to get out of this? There's a very solid Republican base that actually likes John McCain. So he's not doing himself any favors by going after him. He's not doing himself any favors by name-calling Kellyanne Conway's husband on Twitter. All of these things fall below the level of the office. He's got way too much executive time on his hands when there are major issues out there that he can be working on.
He's got a good economic story to tell, a very good market story to tell, and I think he steps on that message. Again, this is my opinion, but I am wondering about the muted response he gets from Republicans who maybe don't want to trigger a Twitter war or back and forth, so they suck it up and they take it, realizing he is the leader of their party, the leader of this country. I get that. I understand that. I can even kind of respect that. But there is a line that now and then that they can cross or at least test it, can't they?
Neil, to John's point earlier, just before we came on, this came up pretty unprovoked today when the president was at that plant speaking about his economic message, about how he said he had saved the plant that was on track to close, and how he thinks in 2020 he'll have a pretty easy time getting reelected, because how would you debate the fact that he's lowered unemployment levels for women, minorities, those sorts of things. So to what you were saying, that's what he was talking about. Switch to John McCain. He did come back to that message and continue to talk about the economy. As for the president's anger at John McCain, I remember being in the Rose Garden on the day when John McCain came back from Arizona. Remember, he had been in treatment, and he came back for the Obamacare vote. And the White House actually delayed an event in the Rose Garden so that John McCain could speak on the floor. So they did at least have a sense, right, that they thought his comments were going to be something that was positive for them. So he's very disappointed with the fact that that was not the case, and he's making that clear.
I understand that. There's frustration in that, but this maybe is beyond the pale. But we'll see. Guys, I appreciate all of you taking your time and your perspective on this.